The snow on the outer ridge of Elmara. 9 fell in silken waves, untouched by war, unspoiled by greed. For generations, the people of Thistledon Village lived in harmony with the frozen earth, their breath rising in steam as they hunted, healed, and harvested beneath the auroras. There was no crime. There were no weapons. Only stories, old ones whispered beside fire pits, about beings too strange and ancient to be real. Myths to scare children from wandering into the woods alone. Viraya moved like she belonged to the snow. Her cloak, long and dark, dragged behind her as she trudged through the knee-high frost with a basket of crystal berries clutched tight. Her breath mist in the air, but her skin, oddly untouched by the cold, did not flush pink like the other villagers. Children waved when she passed. Adults nodded politely but kept their distance. She was a healer. After all, a necessary presence, but unsettling. Something about her eyes made people uneasy. They were too pale, too knowing. At home, the twins waited. Lyra and Dane, barely 8 cycles old, were huddled together under thick fur blankets, watching the dancing lights in the sky through the round window. They always waited there, every night, no matter how many times Viraya told them the auroras weren't going anywhere. Lyra said she liked to pretend the lights were messages from their father, gone long before she could remember him. Dane just liked the colors. Tonight, Viraya returned late. Her expression was pinched, her silence more drawn than usual. The children noticed immediately, but said nothing. She set the basket on the table and knelt between them. Did the wind speak today? Dane asked, his voice small but curious. Viraya offered a faint smile. It did, but it spoke of change. Lyra's eyes darkened. The bad kind. Viraya didn't answer. Instead, she reached behind the hearth where an old book lay hidden in a secret alcove. Its cover was bound in dried root fibers, etched with strange markings of villagers never saw. She turned its pages slowly, as if each word held weight. The children crept closer. "Tell us a story," Lyra whispered. Viraya looked up. "Do you remember the tale of the Baba Yaga?" They nodded. "The witch who lives in a hut on chicken legs. She eats bad children," Dane said with mock terror. "She does not eat children," Viraya corrected. "She protects the boundary between worlds, between what should be and what should never be." A gust howled against the walls then, long and low, as if something immense had stirred in the white hills beyond the village. "Is she real?" Lyra asked. Viraya closed the book. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She was, once, and some say she still is. When the world forgets how to protect itself, she returns." They were silent a moment. Then Lyra, perhaps sensing her mother's unease, reached out and wrapped her small fingers around Viraya's. "Are we safe?" Viraya did not answer. Instead, she drew them both into her arms and whispered ancient words. Words not from this planet, not from this life. That night, long after the twins had fallen asleep, Viraya stood outside, staring into the sky. The auroras twisted as if agitated. A new streak of light, sharp and metallic, sliced through them, a vessel breaching the atmosphere with no intention of peace. It landed far beyond the ridge, but the earth trembled beneath her feet. She did not need to see it to know. Her time of hiding was ending. The next morning, the village awoke to stillness, uncanny and tight. The animals had vanished. Tracks of fear were left in the snow, cloven prints to lone impressions. Elders whispered of omens. Hunters returned from their routes empty-handed, speaking of a silver shadow that had passed overhead, utterly silent but overwhelming. Viraya's pulse quickened. She packed her herbs, gathered the warmest clothes for the twins, and stowed them beneath the floorboards, beneath the ancient hat she'd sworn never to use again. Lyra frowned. "Why are we hiding? Did we do something wrong?" "No, my heart," Viraya murmured. "But someone is coming who believes you are worth destroying to get to me." The twins looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or tremble. By the third day, the skies had changed. The auroras were gone. In their place hovered an unnatural glow, sickly and red. No stars pierced the clouds. The air had an edge to it now, a silent scream beneath every breath. When the first ship arrived, sleek and black, casting no reflection, No one could speak. It hovered above the village like a spider, its mechanical legs folding as it descended. From its belly poured soldiers clad in obsidian armor, their weapons humming with alien energy. They did not announce themselves. They did not parley. They scanned the villagers like cattle, dragging some away, disintegrating others when they did not comply. Viraya did not run. She watched from the shadows of her hut, her fingers coiled around the pendant at her neck. A piece of bone, a relic, a warning. The twins sobbed silently beneath the hatch. Viraya sent a thought, silent and precise, into the sky. It was not a prayer. It was a signal. The invaders called themselves a Dominion. They were looking for something, an anomaly, a source of forbidden energy hidden on this primitive world. When they saw Viraya, their sensors spiked. One commander, silver-masked and unblinking, pointed. That one, she's the beacon. She ran, not because she was afraid, but because she needed them to follow. She led them away from the village, into the snowy cliffs beyond the forest, where her steps left no mark. There, she turned and waited, but the Dominion was not foolish. They doubled back. They found the hut, tore through the floors. The twins were dragged out, crying and kicking. Viraya felt in her bones. Something primal snapped. Her scream was not human. It echoed across the white fields, a call that woke things buried beneath ice for centuries. The snow darkened. The trees bent toward her. The pendant she wore cracked open, releasing a pulse of black fire that raced toward the invaders. The Dominion soldiers hesitated. For the first time, they did not advance. The silver-masked commander raised a hand, but it was too late. Viraya stepped forward from the fog, her eyes no longer pale, but burning gold. Her voice no longer soft, but layered, an ancient tongue that spoke of judgment and fury. I warned you, she said. This place is mine. These children are mine. The wind howled. The sky cracked. The Baba Yaga had returned, and she would not be kind. The Dominion had no use for poetry. Their machines moved with the precision of razors, their tactics written in bloodless efficiency. They swept through Thistledon like a flood of ink over parchment, erasing names, faces, stories. Their soldiers advanced without speaking, without slowing, their armor gleaming like obsidian mirrors that reflected nothing but the coldness of command. In the heart of this mechanical swarm stood Commander Varric, cloaked in a fluid metal mantle that pulsed faintly with crimson light. His face, if it won, was forever concealed behind a polished mask segmented like a beetle's shell. Where others saw conquest as necessity, Varric saw it as ritual. He believed in precision, in ends justified by erasure, and when his instruments detected an energy spike unlike any other, he was not surprised to find it tied to a woman. Local anomaly, the ship's intelligence had reported. Energy resonance, pre-empire. Pattern mythologic. Threat potential undefined. He had heard of such anomalies before, always followed by whispers and ruin. He expected resistance. What he hadn't expected was a raw silence of the village after the initial purge, the quiet born not from. The stars did not blink in this quadrant of the galaxy. They stared, unflinching, omnipresent, indifferent. And beneath their cold gaze, Viraya moved her children to the hushed ruins of the Dominion's wreckage. Her senses stretched in across every breeze, shadow, and ripple of energy. Though the immediate threat had been obliterated in a torrent of ancient power, her instincts remained taut as drawn wire. Peace was a myth carved by fools. She had been raised to know better. The twins walked beside her in silence, still too stunned by the ordeal to ask questions. Lyra held tightly to a shard of twisted Dominion metal she'd picked up in the rubble, its edges dulled by heat, but its meaning sharp in her grip. Dane lagged slightly behind, his eyes fixed on the horizon, lips parted as if listening to something only he could hear. Viraya didn't ask. Not yet. Their time for questions would come, if they survived long enough. They were heading west, toward the Blackwood Divide, a place untouched even by the oldest cartographers. It was there the Earth still remembered what it was like to fight back. She had once hidden there, long before the children, long before she'd become legend. The Dominion would not follow her easily into those shadows. She paused atop a ridge, looking back. The Dominion vessel now lay half swallowed by the tundra, its metal curling like dead leaves. Vines twitched through its frame as though it were still resisting. But there was no time to linger. The atmosphere above them was thick with movement. Silent orbital drifts, magnetic wakes, the scent of approaching warships hanging in the wind like copper and ozone. "Scouts," she whispered. She urged the children forward, pushing through frostbitten reeds and crumbling root veins. The deeper they went, the more the landscape changed. Trees twisted into unnatural spirals, bark gleaming with wet luminescence, and the ground pulsed gently with subterranean heat. Dane stumbled once, his hand brushing a moss-covered stone that shimmered beneath his fingers. He flinched and looked to his mother. It whispered. Viraya turned sharply. "What did it say?" "It remembered me," he murmured. She studied him. Dane had always felt too much, seen too deeply. Lyra's strength was fire, defiant and burning, but Dane was born from still water that hid unknown depths. She'd feared the day his connection to the world beneath would awaken. Now there was no time left to shelter him. By nightfall, they reached the boundary of the divide. The air buzzed with old magic, defensive, feral. Viraya approached the edge of the boundary, where vines slithered like serpents and light bent in unnatural ways. She placed her palm against a rock face, muttered a word that was not quite language but closer to grief, and the stone split open like a yawning mouth. They entered. Inside, the forest breathed. It wasn't metaphor. The very canopy exhaled mist, low and warm, and the ground trembled gently with the beat of some buried heart. Creatures of myth flickered in the underbrush, shadow foxes, windhorns, eyes without form. None attacked. They knew her. The children huddled near the fire she conjured from bark and breath. Lyra finally spoke. "Why did they come for us?" Viraya's gaze was distant. "Because they don't understand what we are. And what they don't understand, they try to break. But we didn't do anything. That's not how fear works." Dane looked up. "Then why do we have to keep running?" Viraya didn't answer. She rose instead and moved to the edge of the clearing, where the roots grew in complex braids like neural pathways. She pressed her fingers to them, closing her eyes. Signals pulsed through her, a memory network older than speech. Through it, she reached out, not for allies, for warnings. The Dominion was reassembling. Not far from the divide's edge, another ship had landed, sleeker, quieter, manned not by foot soldiers, but by null priests. They were tacticians and psychic eradicators trained to dismantle mythic threats through surgical mental warfare. They believed in clean elimination, not scorched conquest. One of them, High Examiner Iskall, watched the divide through a crystalline interface that refracted probability strands. "She is not a single entity," he murmured to his acolytes. "She is a convergence. Shall we engage?" He frowned. "Not yet. Let her fear what she cannot see. Let her spend her power in the dark. When she tires, we erase." Back in the forest, Viraya awoke from her trance with blood on her lip. The divide had spoken, not in words, but in emotion, warning, urgency, betrayal. Someone was already inside. She returned to the children, expression set like carved stone. "We have to move again." Lyra groaned. "We just got here. We're not alone." That night, they ran. Not through clear paths, but through memories carved into bark and stone. Viraya moved by instinct, guiding them through old tunnels that flickered with ancestral light. But the enemy was already close. She could feel it, not the weight of bodies or weapons, but the invasive hum of thoughts that didn't belong. The null priests entered not with feet, but with minds. They peeled back the forest like layers of consciousness, severing roots, corrupting ley lines. One reached into the thoughts of a sleeping beast and turned it inward on itself, laughing as it disintegrated in confusion. Viraya countered with sigils scrawled in light, mirror traps that folded space. The priests found themselves walking in loops, thinking their own thoughts until they cracked an echo. But even her strength was finite, and the deeper they pursued her into the forest, the more of herself she had to give. In a moment of stillness, Dane tugged her sleeve. "They don't fear you. They think they're above fear." "They're not," she said. "They've just forgotten what it feels like." He looked up. "Can I help?" She paused, looked into his eyes. The boy who dreamed in colors no one else could see. The boy who whispered to stone, "You already are." The final confrontation of that night happened beneath the root spire, a vast column of petrified wood that touched the sky and anchored the entire divide's enchantment. Varea stood before it, glyphs pulsing along her arms, every vein filled with the forest's fury. The priests encircled her, their forms blurred, cloaked in thought-distortion fields. "Release your link to the wild," Iskall said, "or we sever with pain." "You don't understand," Varea replied. "I'm not linked to it. I am it." The root spire responded to her voice, its bark splitting, releasing spores of living fire. The air became dense with forgotten names, and light bent into weapons. The forest itself rose in defense, branches as blades, rivers as whips, wind as shrieks. But the priests fought back with silence. They cut through thought, silencing spells before they were born. One of them reached Lyra, tearing at her mind. She screamed, and Dane stepped forward. He said nothing, only placed his hand on the earth. The root spire shimmered. Then it listened. The priest staggered, not from physical assault, but from the sudden invasion of every memory the forest held. Every life lost, every scream unheeded, every fire lit in desperation. They were shown, not just what Varea was, but what they were not. They broke under the weight of history they had tried to erase. Varea didn't smile. She never did after war. She stepped forward and scattered the remnants of the priests with a breath. The forest folded back around them, restoring what it could. When the sky no longer hid its hunger, it crackled with energy, lit not by stars or by the breach of artificial suns. Dominion war engines unfurling like blooming steel flowers in orbit. There was no subtlety left in their approach. They came now not to capture, not to interrogate, but to annihilate. A reckoning. They called it in their encrypted frequencies. A purging of legend. Varea stood on the ledge of the Blackwood Divide, her silhouette half swallowed by mist and moonlight. Below her, the forest pulsed with slow defiance. Beside her, the twins stared up into the churning heavens. Lyra's fingers twitched around the Dominion shard. She refused to let go. Dane, silent and distant, blinked as if seeing events already written in the future's bones. She had prepared them as best she could, though what lay ahead was beyond lessons or ritual. This was the final stage of the conflict she had buried for years. She could not protect them from what they were any longer, nor from what the Dominion had become. The command ship, Righteous Silence, began its descent with a thunderous sonic wall. Trees bent sideways from the pressure. Birds scattered. The earth groaned. A single dropship speared toward the divide like a falling monolith, its hull marked with symbols that hadn't been used since the first expansion wars. The Dominion had summoned their elders. Out of the dropship emerged General Merith, a being wrapped in synthetic muscle, half man, half artifact. His face was a mass of engineered age, eyes a continuous readout of terrain, threat levels, and projected futures. Unlike Varric or Iskall, he carried no illusions about myth or anomaly. He saw only targets. He stepped onto sacred soil with the arrogance of a conqueror, his boots searing sigils into the ground. The creature has taken form. He broadcast across all frequencies. Primary objective, erase the vessel. Secondary, terminate progeny. Tertiary, deconstruct territory. From the woods, Varea watched his descent like one might watch an avalanche. She could feel the Dominion strategy unfold. Encirclement, psychic suppression, terrain sterilization. They were ready for a witch. They were not ready for a mother. That night, she took the children deeper into the divide. Past places even she hadn't touched in years. Roots nodded like prayer beads. Caves where light whispered in voices. Streams that flowed both ways. At the center was a hollow tree, ancient and near dead, with a veil between world and memory thin to a breath. This was where she had buried her name. She reached into the soil and pulled forth a bundle of dried herbs, bones, and bloodstone. Her past self, wrapped in silence, sealed against desperation. She unwrapped it now and whispered truths into her children's ears. Stories she had never dared tell. "We were not always hunted," she said. "There was a time when the galaxy turned to us for guidance, when balance mattered more than conquest. But empires rise by devouring memory, so they named us monsters. Lyra clenched her fists. Then let them see what monsters we can be. Dane, quiet as ever, simply asked, "Will it hurt?" Viraya knelt before them, placing one hand on each of their chests. "Yes, but not more than what they've already taken." The ritual began with song, low, tonal, vibrating with pain and power. The hollow tree pulsed with light, branches reaching skyward in brittle longing. Glyphs leapt from bark to skin, binding mother and children in ancestral memory. Viraya felt her form shift, less solid, more storm. Her blood turned to smoke. Her voice split in two. The children changed too. Lyra's hair crackled with flame even as her skin shimmered, like obsidian armor. The air around her distorted, light bending to her will. Dane's eyes went white, not blind but blank, as if seeing into the marrow of the universe. Viraya wept silently, not from grief, but from awe. They were becoming what the forest had always known they could be. By dawn, the Dominion made their move. The command ship opened its siege gates and unleashed the Ash Legion, a battalion bred for total annihilation, resistant to magic, immune to fear. They moved with clockwork precision, cutting through the forest like fire through silk. The Divide responded, but not as before. No more illusions, no whispers. This time it screamed. Viraya met them at the breach, alone. The trees parted for her. The wind stilled. She hovered above the ground, her feet no longer necessary. Around her, the air shimmered with old light. The first row of Ash soldiers aimed and fired. The blast spent, not deflected, refused. She raised one arm, and the ground erupted with spires of living wood, impaling the front line. She moved like a phantom, untouchable, striking with storms, vanishing into fog. But for every 10 soldiers she destroyed, 20 more arrived. Their weapons adapted. Their armor burned but did not break. They were not here to win. They were here to outlast. Back at the hollow tree, Lyra and Dane stood surrounded by Dominion scouts who had found the secondary trail. Lyra stood between them and her brother, flames wreathing her body. "Move and you melt," she warned. One step forward anyway. He screamed before he could reach her, his body collapsing into ash as the heat overwhelmed his suit. The others hesitated. Dane touched the root of the tree. The air around him rippled, then cracked. Time folded. Not completely, just enough. The soldiers saw themselves aging, dying, repeating failures in endless loops. Some dropped their weapons. Others turned on each other in confused panic. Lyra finished the rest. Above, Mareth watched the chaos from his command vessel. "Deploy the null core," he ordered. "Strip the forest. We win this by subtraction." The null core fell like a star. But before it could land, a shadow leapt from the forest canopy. Viraya, burning brighter than any spell ever cast, grabbed at midair. Her body twisted in a spiral of flame and wind as she redirected the core back into the sky. It exploded against a command ship. The blast lit the sky with artificial dawn. Meretha's ship reeled, shields collapsing in waves. His mast cracked. Systems screamed. Viraya landed, panting, eyes dimming. They came for her again. This time, she didn't rise. She looked to the trees, whispering a name only the forest remembered, and the forest answered, not with branches, not with beasts, but with the past. The Divide pulled itself open. From beneath its roots, the ghosts of the old world emerged. Guardians of time, warriors of forgotten wars, echoes with swords of song and sorrow. They moved without orders. They moved because the world had been wronged. The Dominion faltered. Their guns jammed. Their minds fractured. Their formations shattered. At the hollow tree, the children stood alone now, surrounded by calm. Lyra reached for her mother through the bond, but it flickered weakly. "She's fading," she whispered. Dane stepped forward, hand shaking. "No, she's becoming." A final surge of energy swept through the forest. The Divide sealed itself. The trees regrew in seconds. The Ash Legion vanished as though swallowed by history itself. When it was over, there was no wreckage, no bodies, just silence. And in the clearing where Varea had stood, a stone now rested, smooth, black, humming with warmth. The twins approached. Etched on the stone in glowing glyphs was a single word, remember. Lyra knelt, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. Dane laid his hand on the stone and nodded, as if he could hear her still. They turned,